Welcome to Underwire History. As we continue our journey through 15th century England, a power struggle unfolds. The throne of King Henry VI has been a point of contention since his early reign. The king's mental health issues have left governance in limbo, and various factions vie for control. The nobility is increasingly at odds over the role of the monarch, the power of Parliament, and the English Church. Against this backdrop of turmoil, King Henry VI summons the members of Parliament to Westminster on February 12, 1449. This assembly will have far-reaching consequences for the future of England. In light of his fragile mental state, the king's instructions are crucial in understanding the dynamics at play. King Henry VI of England summons the members of Parliament, directing them to assemble on February 12 at Westminster, unfolded through interacting constraints rather than one isolated trigger. Decision-makers operated within institutional limits, and each response narrowed the next available option. The evidence points to compounding risk rather than a single dramatic cause. That causal chain becomes clearer when incentives, governance, and timing are read together. King Henry VI's summons marks a pivotal moment in English history. The Assembly of Parliament on February 12 at Westminster is not simply a response to the king's mental health issues. Rather, it reflects a complex interplay between competing interests and institutional constraints. The nobility's demands for greater power and representation have created an environment where Parliament's role is increasingly essential. In this context, the king's directive serves as both a catalyst for change and a recognition of the existing power dynamics. The Assembly will address pressing issues such as taxation, military campaigns, and ecclesiastical appointments, with each decision influencing the next. The interplay between the monarch, Parliament, and the English Church sets in motion a chain of events that will reshape the country's governance for generations to come. As King Henry VI navigates this treacherous landscape, his decisions are shaped by the competing demands of powerful factions and the limitations imposed by his fragile mental state. The king's summons sets in motion a chain reaction within Parliament as members assemble to address pressing issues. Taxation, military campaigns, and ecclesiastical appointments dominate the agenda, each decision influencing the next. Parliament's role becomes increasingly essential as the nobility demands greater power and representation. The Assembly serves as both a catalyst for change and a recognition of existing power dynamics between the monarch, Parliament, and the English Church. As Parliament addresses these pressing issues, it becomes clear that its influence will extend beyond individual decisions to shape the country's governance for generations to come. The interplay between institutional actors sets in motion a series of consequences that will reshape English history, including shifts in power dynamics and changes to the system of governance. The king's directive to Parliament serves as a catalyst for change, but also reflects the existing power dynamics at play. As members assemble on February 12 at Westminster, they are aware that their decisions will have far-reaching consequences. Their deliberations on taxation, military campaigns, and ecclesiastical appointments will not only address pressing issues, but also shape the country's governance for generations to come. The pressures on King Henry VI continued to escalate as he struggled to maintain control over a fractious nobility. Ecclesiastical appointments, a crucial aspect of power distribution in medieval England, became increasingly contentious. The king's mental state worsened, causing concern among his advisors and Parliament members. As tensions mounted, the role of the English Church in governance began to take center stage. With each decision, the power dynamics between the monarch, Parliament, and the Church shifted, narrowing options for Henry VI. The nobility, sensing weakness, began to consolidate their own power bases, further limiting the king's ability to act. Parliament's influence extended beyond individual decisions as its members became embroiled in disputes over taxation, military campaigns, and ecclesiastical appointments. As Parliament wrestled with these issues, the country teetered on the brink of chaos, with potential consequences for the future of English governance looming large. The House of Commons had grown increasingly vocal about the need for financial reform. A report by a group of prominent merchants and landowners proposed a new system of taxation to alleviate the burden on commoners and provide revenue for the Crown. In 1452, the nobility's increasing discontent culminated in the first Parliament of King Henry VI, where representatives from various regions convened to address growing concerns over governance and power distribution. The House of Commons presented a petition calling for greater accountability and transparency in government, highlighting issues with taxation, military expenditure, and ecclesiastical appointments. The English Church's role in governance became increasingly contentious as the Church sought to assert its influence and protect its interests. Tensions between the monarch, Parliament, and the Church led to a series of power struggles that ultimately weakened King Henry VI's position. As the nobility continued to consolidate their power bases, they began to challenge the king's authority on matters of war, peace, and diplomacy. Parliament's influence extended beyond individual decisions as its members became embroiled in disputes over the role of the English Church in governance and the relationship between church and state. The House of Commons' proposal for a new system of taxation was met with resistance from certain members of the nobility who sought to protect their own privileges and interests. In 1455, King Henry VI suffered a mental breakdown, leading to concerns about his fitness to rule and further weakening his position against the increasingly powerful nobles and Parliament. The first Parliament of King Henry VI marked a turning point in English governance, as the struggle for power among the monarch, nobility, and Parliament intensified. As tensions between the Church and state continued to rise, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Berchier, emerged as a key figure in mediating between the warring factions. Berchier's efforts ultimately failed to ease the crisis, however, as King Henry VI's mental breakdown in 1455 led to a period of regency under Richard, Duke of York. The power vacuum created by the king's incapacitation allowed the nobles to consolidate their control over Parliament and manipulate its agenda to suit their interests. This marked a significant shift in the balance of power within English governance, as the nobility began to wield greater influence over both the monarch and Parliament. The Church's role in this struggle for power should not be overlooked, as ecclesiastical appointments continued to fuel tensions between church and state. In 1459, the Earl of Warwick, a prominent member of the nobility, led an armed rebellion against the Duke of Somerset, one of the king's key advisors. The conflict escalated into open warfare, with Parliament ultimately supporting the Earl of Warwick and his faction in their bid for power. This marked a significant escalation in the conflict between the monarch, nobility, and Parliament, as each side sought to assert its dominance over the others. The Church's stance on the matter was crucial, as many bishops sided with the Earl of Warwick, further undermining King Henry VI's authority. In 1460, the Duke of York's death at the Battle of Wakefield marked a turning point in the conflict, as his son Edward IV seized power and effectively became the de facto ruler of England. Edward IV's coronation later that year cemented his position, but at a great cost. The English monarchy had become increasingly beholden to the nobility, and Parliament had emerged as a powerful force in shaping governance. The crisis of the 1450 was exacerbated by economic factors, including a decline in trade and a shortage of labor due to the effects of the Black Death. In response, King Henry VI's government implemented a series of policies aimed at restricting the power of the nobility, but these efforts were met with resistance from powerful landowners such as Richard, Duke of York, who had long-standing grievances against the king. The Duke of York's marriage to Cecily Neville, a member of the powerful House of Lancaster, further complicated the situation, as it created ties between his family and the royal house. Ecclesiastical appointments continued to be a source of tension, with many bishops holding significant amounts of land and wielding considerable influence over local governance. The Earl of Warwick's rebellion in 1459 was motivated in part by a desire to limit the power of the Duke of Somerset, who had been appointed Lord Protector in the king's absence. This appointment had been seen as an attempt by the king to consolidate his own power at the expense of the nobility, and many members of the aristocracy felt threatened by it. The Earl of Warwick's rebellion was a direct challenge to King Henry VI's authority, but it also highlighted the divisions within the nobility itself. Many noble families were aligned with the king, while others sided with the Duke of York or even formed their own coalitions against him. The appointment of the Duke of Somerset as Lord Protector had created a power vacuum that Warwick sought to fill by claiming the position for himself. However, this move was met with resistance from other noble families who saw Warwick's rise to power as a threat to their own interests. The Earl of Oxford, for instance, refused to support Warwick's claim and instead backed the king in his efforts to maintain control over the government. This split within the nobility weakened Warwick's position and allowed King Henry VI to regain some ground, but it also created an opportunity for Edward IV to seize power. Edward IV's subsequent coronation marked a significant shift in the balance of power, with the nobility now effectively controlling the English monarchy through their influence over Parliament and the royal household. The consequences of this development were far-reaching, as the English system of governance became increasingly dependent on the whims of powerful noble families rather than any fixed set of laws or institutions. Ecclesiastical appointments continued to play a significant role in shaping the conflict, with bishops often acting as mediators or even taking sides in disputes between rival noble factions. The role of women in this period is also notable, particularly that of Cecily Neville, who managed to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries within her family and beyond to secure power and influence for herself and her descendants. As tensions continued to escalate, it became increasingly clear that a major crisis was brewing, one that would ultimately lead to the downfall of King Henry VI and the rise of Edward IV as de facto ruler of England. The Earl of Shrewsbury's refusal to support Warwick's claim had significant consequences, as he became an isolated figure in the nobility with limited influence over the king. This isolation ultimately led to his involvement in a plot to overthrow Warwick and install Edward IV on the throne, but it also marked a turning point for Shrewsbury himself, who would later find himself at odds with Edward's regime. The tension between Warwick and Edward continued to escalate as they each sought to outmaneuver the other in pursuit of power. Their rivalry drew in key figures from across England, including the powerful Bishop of Exeter, who ultimately sided with Warwick despite his reservations about the Duke's methods. As a result, Edward IV found himself facing opposition not only from Warwick, but also from within his own household, where some members began to question his leadership and tactics. Edward's response was to consolidate power through increased reliance on those he trusted most, such as William Herbert and Lord Hastings. This move further entrenched the notion that might makes right in English politics, as loyalty became increasingly conditional on personal allegiance rather than a sense of duty or obligation. The effects of this trend were far-reaching, leading to an erosion of trust among noble families and a shift away from traditional forms of governance based on precedent and custom. Thanks for listening to Underwire History. Look forward to seeing you next time.